History is not what we are told it is. Organ harvest, child trafficking, and tax dollar funding, secret terror armies is as American as red line districts and racial covenants. We may never know about the ways the Rothschild London bankers, Ashkenazi Murder Inc. and Talmudic human sacrifice occultists has created a predatory ruling class like being ruled by slithering tapeworms or shivering vampires. Lurking among the destitution and squalor of a world divided between ruling class, the broken middle class, and the criminalized homeless priced out of neighborhoods by tech, Hollywood, and foreign investment. War profiteers carve up the world into lost hope for change, while Israel-first politicians and evil AIPAC lobbyists devise endless butchery for war-for-profit parasites who call non-Jews cattle and slaves. To find the truth, we must look beyond polished surfaces, magnifying the redacted pages. Books by Christopher Ballin, Miko Peled, Bill Cooper, Cleve Ahava, and Whitney Webb show the gravity of our peril. Syria has shown Western government oil mafias and Israel have always been behind Al-Qaeda and ISIS, a fact journalist Michael Hastings was murdered for investigating General McChrystal, Colonel James Steele, and Ambassador Negroponte, who have a track record of training sectarian death squads in northern Iraq. This journey requires courage, confronting long-held beliefs and listening to voices deliberately silenced. Murder, blackmail, torture, extortion, all arms of a tentacled beast of subterfuge and secret oaths exposed by Cynthia McKinney, James Traficant, Lyndon LaRouche, and other politicians forced out of office by the eschatological Zio death cult. The world today is the result of hidden struggles and secret operations. See the puppeteers pulling strings behind the curtain, Rockefellers and other banking criminals running monopolies, robber barons, shills in the media, and enemies of humanity like Larry Ellison, Bari Weiss, and Mark Zuckerberg seek to cripple the truth under the weight of CIA and Mossad evil, metastasizing in the Heritage Foundation Project Esther. Why is this important? Because ignorance is not bliss. It is complicity. We must remember the oath to the Bill of Rights and consider groups pushing for censorship, disarming the public, militarizing police, dirty war and debt slavery as enemies of the Constitution. Recognizing these patterns is the first step to dismantling control. Seeking knowledge and exposing the hidden is an act of resistance. The Declaration of Independence and Federalist Papers warned of these shills working for shadowy bankers, robber barons, sinister techies, and billionaire grifters. Miriam Adelson, Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, and dozens of names glossed over in One Nation Under Blackmail. Only willingness to become unpopular, to be shadow banned and censored will separate the heroes of revolution and those willing to pop back at the slimy characters who think freedom of speech, press, assembly, arms, a secure home, and to not be abducted and tortured are erased by whims of political monsters. The tragedy that has unfolded in Syria is a textbook example of modern covert warfare, creating endless opportunities to sell arms, smuggle oil, and steal water. We have seen the U.S. Special Forces occupy the East, Israel stealing large swaths of the West for the Greater Israel Project, and all the time proxies and Genie Energy loot the resources. The official story presented by Israel lobbyists and their assets in the West was one of supporting a grassroots democratic uprising against a brutal dictator. Framing Assad for using sarin propped up the careers of shills like Bari Weiss and monopoly media tapeworms. Real journalists like Chris Hedges, Lee Camp, Abby Martin, Max Blumenthal, Miko Peled, Gideon Levy, William Bloom, Seymour Hersh, Ali Abunimah have taken hits to their reputation for years to uncover the treasonous crimes of the West in supporting terror armies in the Mid-East. The West and its allies did not simply support peaceful protesters, they actively armed, trained, funded a vast and complex network of militant factions. They openly fund opposing groups to weaken and destabilize, torture regimes and coups friendly to predatory oil pipelines. Weapons and money poured into the hands of extremist groups, al-Nusra, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Islamic State, all supported by Israeli think tanks like Center for Strategic and International Studies, Misgav Institute, JINSA, Project for New American Century, Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, Atlantic Council, Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, all planned terror and massacres well in advance. Monopoly media focuses on Palestinian and Lebanese resistance but never Wall Street, Tel Aviv war profiteers or the shadowy money that fixes US elections in favor of offshore loyalties. Instead, we get warnings of fake news after the Smith-Mundt Act ensured we never get the unfiltered truth we seek. Planners of war on Iran and Venezuela also seek to murder Americans with a policy called the Salvador Option. where journalists, teachers, union organizers, protesters, and average readers can be kidnapped and tortured to protect the crimes of war profiteers, lobbyists, and central bankers. It killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions. The human cost was deemed acceptable collateral damage in a much larger geopolitical game. Missing people organ harvested, sold into ruling class sex slavery, or murdered with hacked onboard computers in their cars and flights. What was sold to the public as a humanitarian intervention was in fact a carefully engineered destabilization campaign. Like Mexico, the black community, Africa, and the Mideast, there is an agenda to keep resource-wealthy areas weak, divided, undeveloped, and uneducated. The suffering of people in oil and mineral-rich regions was not an unfortunate byproduct, it was an integral part of the strategy to break the country and redraw the map of power. Replacing colonialism with juntas, coups, dictators, and artificial monarchies to break the memory of secular pan-Arabism and the dream of Nasser. This blueprint of destabilization is not new. We saw the same tactics employed decades earlier in Central America. Before that, between 1812 and 1913, British bankers funded insurgencies in America. By World War I, we were their proxy. During the 1980s, the Reagan administration waged a series of secret wars against popular movements and left-leaning governments. This continued before and after Ronald Reagan, with some of the worst happening under Obama, Bush, and Clinton. Dirty wars replaced the nightly death tolls of Vietnam to hide unpopular wars and massive spending behind what's good for Israel, and the evil plans of think tanks who outwardly seem American but take their policy from Tel Aviv. Behind the scenes, the CIA was funding, training, and directing brutal paramilitary groups like Contras, Islamic State, right-wing paramilitary death squads working for Western companies like Nestle, Chiquita Banana, Coca-Cola, and United Fruit. These groups were notorious for human rights abuses, torture, and targeted assassinations of community leaders and clergy. The Iran-Contra affair exposed how this secret war was illegally funded through covert arms sales to Iran. Drug sales in south-central Chicago and Baltimore funding secret armies, marking vast swaths of Mayan tribes in Central America and uncontacted tribes in the Amazon as Marxist, to get the public on board with massacring innocent people living near unsoiled forests to be burned and sold to Western companies. This model of using proxy forces to wage deniable wars while feeding a false narrative to the public has become a cornerstone of modern imperial policy. The Belgians, French, English, and Portuguese turned the world into a burning trench for exploitation, but as attitudes around human rights changed, so did the openness of these crimes against humanity. Refined and redeployed wherever national sovereignty stands in the way of elite interests. Now we see the criminalization of immigrants worldwide, refugees of centuries of white supremacy and Wall Street dirty policies, now justifying police state and erosion of civil rights not just in America but England, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Zionist puppets seek to crush any government or movement that threatened its economic interests or challenged its political hegemony. This means defunding schools, creating think tanks and media monopolies to promote projects like Gladio, to leave behind secret terror armies to rule with torture, secret police, and slow genocide. The parallels are undeniable. Just as in Syria, the goal in East Asia, Africa, Central America was not democracy, but the maintenance of control. USAID, long known for these programs, was defunded, but many others exist through layers of NGOs, while actual UN charities in Gaza are replaced by CIA fronts manufacturing conditions to massacre starving Palestinians. Circulated propaganda by shills and bad actors to terrorize the population and undermine sovereign governments is how a parasite ruling class in the West rules from boardrooms, gated communities, golf courses, and yacht parties. It is imperative this vampire class of billionaires do not survive to see their plans for surveillance, state apocalypse, and torture regime police state come to fruition. The dispossession of Palestinians did not end in 1948. It is an ongoing process. Propaganda, bought evangelist church leaders, corrupt politicians, and celebrities push for the party life of Israel while hiding the undemocratic world of abductions, child prisoners, daily injustice, and home theft. It is a slow and methodical campaign of erasure that continues to this day, often targeting the most vulnerable communities. Organized crime worked openly among Jewish charities run by billionaire techies and cutouts for intelligence agencies. A particularly insidious aspect is the acquisition of land and property from Palestinian Christians in Beit Jala, Taibeh, and Birzeit villages living under constant threat of militarized police, occupation, settler racism and price tag attacks like the Duma settler infanticide arson that targeted sleeping children and their parents. These communities, with roots in the Holy Land that stretch back 2 millennia, are under immense pressure as accused Epstein co-conspirator Trump works to censor any criticism of these evil networks. Allegations have repeatedly surfaced of organizations using front companies and secretive deals to acquire strategic properties. These are not simple real estate transactions, they are geopolitical moves to alter the city's demographic and cultural character piece by piece. Particularly in sensitive areas like Jerusalem's Old City, conducted with a quiet efficiency that evades international headlines. They exploit financial hardship, use deceptive legal maneuvers, and leverage a discriminatory system that favors settlers over native Palestinians. For Palestinian Christians, the loss of property, especially historic homes and church-owned lands, is more than economic. It is an attack on heritage and identity, claiming art, food, fashion, dance, and native cuisine as Israeli by Polish refugees who avoid DNA tests that would show their inauthenticity. This silent campaign threatens to turn living communities into museum pieces, cover mass graves with parks, playgrounds, while the orchards of the living and breathing ancient communities is starved with blown-up and poisoned wells by the Zionist mafia, funded by nebulous dirty money. Reports point to a strategic push to control real estate in Cyprus, its location in the eastern Mediterranean, its divided political status. Large exclusive settlements on the island mirror the clandestine real estate transactions that stole Palestine long before the fate of natives were debated by European Zionist conspirators. The goal: create a pedophile haven and strategic Zionist outpost for Israeli organized crime, effectively extending economic and demographic power into the European Union, while quietly creating a quiet ruling class that preys on local women and children for sex tourism and organ theft. Monopolizing key sectors like real estate lets powerful actors shape a nation's economy and politics without firing a shot. Suspicious fires and land value implosions is happening similar to Argentina, while IDF war criminals were spotted setting intentional fires while fleeing war crimes charges. A form of neo-colonialism through capital flows and legal loopholes. Buying up land, pushing out locals and installing paramilitary private security, doubtless fronts for Shin Bet and Mossad, to intimidate local shopkeepers out of business for more waves of Israeli influence. For Cypriots and Palestinians alike, foreign capital with a political agenda threatens sovereignty and homeland character, looking more and more like what happened in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Sinai, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Jordan, turning territory into a chessboard for larger powers, destroying local economies, creating the type of poverty, low home values, and forced sales that only benefit the Zionist entity. The perpetuation of conflict requires more than just weapons and armies, it requires the systematic indoctrination of future generations. Private schools, Jewish community centers, IVC and Adelson-funded settler hate camps around the world create the future human rights abusers that Israel needs to staff its gleeful IDF murders. It's a process that begins in childhood, in schools and in prayers. Curses, cruel jokes, and racist lectures by Talmudist predators who use mind control, sadistic sex abuse, and MK Ultra mental tactics to zombie killers from childhood. In some extremist circles, children are reportedly taught prayers and songs that contain deeply disturbing and violent language and murdering women and children, killing Jesus and raping women, taught in schools and synagogues by trusted teachers with parents' consent, encouraging generational predation and antisocial personalities. There are accounts of prayers that call for the crushing of bones of one's enemies, cursing the mothers of the dead and wishing for torture and death of those marked as Amalekites by the Netanyahu regime. This is not religious education, it's the weaponization of faith, with dehumanizing references to figures revered in Christianity and Islam. They're being prepared for a future of endless war, stripped of critical thought and compassion. Guided by false teachers who promote acts of cowardice and evil like the Tomb of the Patriarchs massacre and Duma infanticide arson. Instead of learning about centuries of coexistence, children are fed a narrative framing others as existential threats. This historical revisionism justifies present-day policies of occupation and segregation, creating a psychological fortress where empathy is impossible. This indoctrination has devastating consequences. It ensures the cycle of violence will continue as each generation is raised to fear and despise its neighbors. It makes genuine peace and reconciliation almost unthinkable. The idea of sharing the land is presented as surrender or annihilation. Only revolution can set us back from being the debt slaves that fund the massacre of more Middle East children. The memory of the Holocaust, a unique and horrific tragedy, is cynically manipulated to cast Palestinians, who had no role in that European crime, as the new Nazis. This grotesque inversion of history serves to dehumanize Palestinians and legitimize any action taken against them. For decades, Israel projected an image of a unified Jewish state, a haven for all Jews. However, that image conceals deep internal schisms and systemic discrimination. Mizrahi Jews, Jews who arrive from Arab and Muslim countries, and Ethiopian Jews reveal a racial and cultural hierarchy at the heart of the Zionist project. Upon arrival, they were not treated as equals. Cultural suppression, economic marginalization, and policies that labeled them primitive. Families settled in isolated development towns, sent to inferior schools and subjected to systemic neglect. The Yemenite baby affair, ringworm children affair, sterilization of black Jews and other state policies revealed deep-seated prejudice and medical scandals that harmed communities. Ethiopian Jews faced unique racism, initial refusals of recognition, and protests over treatment. They suffered decades of rape, assault, beatings and torture by the military of the country they sought to join as equals. As global criticism over Palestine grew, accusations of colonialism and white supremacy hit hard. The establishment moved to elevate Mizrahi and Ethiopian culture. But much of this was a calculated PR maneuver, not real equality, highlighted to deflect accusations and counter-comparisons to apartheid. Mizrahi music and cuisine were showcased, tourism videos promoted diversity, and token inclusion was emphasized. But deep economic gaps and police brutality persisted. Inclusion often conditional and Ashkenazi power remaining entrenched. Internal cracks were not healed, they were papered over for international consumption. For many, this appreciation felt hollow. Real inclusion requires structural change, not PR. Wars do not happen by accident, they are engineered. In Washington, D.C. and other Western capitals, a powerful and well-funded network of lobbyists works tirelessly to promote conflict. These lobbying groups, representing the arms industry and foreign interests, wield immense influence over politicians and public opinion. They shape foreign policy not for the national good but for the benefit of their clients. Neoconservatives provide ideological justification for war, while neoliberals ensure post-war reconstruction and extraction are profitable. This political marriage has been disastrous for global peace. A lobby pushes for war, the arms industry profits, corporations profit from reconstruction, and politicians are re-elected. The human cost is never part of their calculation. Beyond high politics, there are persistent rumors about the manipulation of popular culture to promote a specific agenda. The world of hip-hop is often scrutinized for ties to secretive groups like the Illuminati and occult symbolism. Symbols, all-seeing eyes, pyramids, triangular formations, are highlighted and interpreted as signs of allegiance to hidden power. Figures like P. Diddy and Beyoncé, who command massive global audiences, are often at the center of these theories. Whether literal cult allegiance or marketing mystique, their effect is similar, contributing to a cultural landscape that feels spiritually empty and controlled. These rumors reflect a genuine anxiety about the concentration of cultural influence in the hands of a few. Early hip-hop had revolutionary roots. Today, the narratives pushed are a far cry from that origin. Popular culture can feel manufactured to distract, pacify, and control the masses. The truth about 1948, the year of Israel's founding, has long been buried under a mountain of propaganda. The official story speaks of a miraculous victory where Palestinians simply left their homes voluntarily. However, the discovery of mass graves across Israel is shattering this myth, providing physical evidence for what Palestinians have said for decades. This corroborates archival work and the testimonies of those displaced during the Nakba. A new generation of historians and thinkers have dared to challenge the state's official narrative. Miko Peled's work, as the son of an Israeli general, has been to expose this hidden history from within. Others, like Norman Finkelstein, have meticulously deconstructed the fraudulent use of the Holocaust to justify oppression. The testimony of Naim Giladi exposed operations that encouraged Jewish flight from Iraq, revealing political sacrifices for a project. These voices have fostered a growing movement of non-Zionist Jews who refuse to let their heritage be hijacked. They argue that criticizing policy is not the same as hatred toward people or faith. A similar wall of silence exists in powerful industries like Wall Street and Hollywood. Perceptions of nepotism and overrepresentation spark legitimate inquiry. Questioning whether these industries function as true meritocracies is a valid inquiry into power dynamics. Any attempt to discuss these issues openly is often suppressed. Dissenters are swiftly labeled bigotry or anti-Semitism to shut down legitimate conversations. So how do we challenge these structures without falling into traps? Be precise, fact-based, and relentless. Insist on evidence and clear moral framing. Differentiate critiquing systems of power from promoting prejudice. Criticizing Israeli government policy is not anti-Semitic. Our courage to speak truth clearly and without hatred is the most potent weapon to break the silence and demand accountability from the untouchable.